Morning boys and girls. So I've had my Speedmaster a year now, and I decided to do a 1-year evaluation, the good, the bad and the infernal warranty repairs. So last year, spring 2022, I decided finally to sell my beloved Harley Sportster, and I got to looking for a replacement. I've done a video so I won't go over all of that, but I eventually ended up with a Triumph Speedmaster. In the process, I contacted 5 dealers to arrange test rides and viewings and whatnot. And, it was a mixed experience, to say the least. For instance, one dealer I went to, I think they had 4 2018 bikes at the time. They were then 4 years old, and all of them were £11,500. I was shocked, bearing in mind at that point, a new Speedmaster was £12,100. That's a £600 reduction for a 4-year-old bike with miles on it. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I did complain to the sales guy, and he was a nice chap. And I said, look, if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I'm going to wind up with a new one. I'm not going to save £600 for a 4-year-old bike. And he went off and asked his boss. And his boss said, we can sell them all, there's a shortage of bikes, we'll offer you £100 off. And that was it. I was offended that they wouldn't make more of an effort to try and sell the bike. If that's what the cost of a second-hand one is, I might as well get a new one, which is what I did. I bought a 2022 brand new bike from Edinburgh Triumph. 2 Wheels is the name of the dealer. Robert Lennox sorted me out. There were various problems, but he was really good. Went to bat for me, and I spent £12,500 on a 2022 bike with extras like bags. I was very pleased with. I was never going to get a deal better than that. So I was very happy with that. Very happy with 2 Wheels in Edinburgh, and happy with Robert Lennox. So at that point, all was good. Spring 2022. Delivery day was the 27th of June, and I was well excited. And I went down to see one dealer, who we shall call Dealer X, and I asked them, are there any options for extended foot controls? And he said no, there was not even an aftermarket option. I spoke to 2 fellas and didn't get anywhere, hopeless. In the end, I purchased a extended forward control set from Speed in Australia. I went to Dealer X and asked if they could fit these forward controls, and they said, we don't fit non-Triumph parts, despite the fact that outside it says all makes servicing and MOT. Rubbish. If we compare that with Harley Davidson, which is all I've got to compare it to, that's what I'm coming from. Generally, Harley Davidson dealers seem happy to fit aftermarket parts, and from my experience, they seem much more confident in offering parts advice. So after receiving our bike on the 27th of June, went out for a couple of rides, as you would. I asked Dealer X, I said, could they adjust the foot brake? It's a bit too high. And I was told there's no one available, and anyway, we don't do that. Again, at Harley Davidson, I did the same on my Sportster, and a gent was out of the workshop with an Allen key, and it was sorted out immediately. I didn't buy the bike from them, there was no quibble. By the 30th of June, it was clear I was going to do, I think first service is due at 600 miles, so I was going to do that very quickly. So I thought I'd get the service booked, and I asked Dealer X, and he said, we refuse to prioritise a bike that was not bought from us. And here I was dumbfounded initially, and then I was very angry, and I felt hugely offended as well. I just couldn't believe I was being treated so shoddily as far as I was concerned. It seemed that because I bought the bike from Scotland, I was a second-class Triumph customer. My £12,500 for a brand new bike, it didn't include me into the Triumph fold, not for Dealer X at least. So there and then I was in the car park of Dealer X on the 30th of June, and I phoned Exeter Triumph, which is Bridge Motorcycles, and I booked a service as quick as I could get one, and I think it was about 4 weeks before they could fit me in, something like that. And, phoning in June, it's going to be the busiest time, there's nothing much you can do about that. So I got the first service done on the 27th of July, but then I got it home, and I noticed the oil was leaking. So I phoned Scott and booked it in again to have a look. I thought it was the drain plug, but Scott said it wasn't, and I did try and tighten the drain plug, but it was already very tight. But there are only 2 bolts underneath from what I can see, There's an M6 and an M14 bolt. But when I got the bike home, I was stunned to find it was still leaking. So I phoned Scott again, obviously straight away, and got the bike booked in as quick as I could to get it checked. So this would have been the 2nd of August. It was booked in for the 18th of August. Scott said they were going to fully replace the bolt and seal. And that took a week or so because they had to wait for parts. Again, nothing you can do about that, but it meant another week lost. I got the bike back after that week, and unbelievably, it was still leaking oil. So I took a couple of pictures and I sent them to Scott and phoned Scott again, and they couldn't fit the bike in. So the 4th of October, the bike went in again, and this time, Scott said they had to replace all the engine cases. They phoned Triumph, and that's a massive job, replacing all the engine cases. So now my bike got no engine number, for instance, because the cases are new. The bike was in on the 4th of October, but I wasn't going to be riding until November. In December 2022, it was a lot of bad weather here in Blighty. The roads were very dirty and very salty. And in the first week of January, unbelievably, the bike wouldn't start. I had to bump it down the hill, which did start it, but when I got to the petrol station, it died again. I pushed it over to the nearest dealer from the petrol station, and he kindly jump-started it for me. Well, it was back on the road again. That was okay. It was a wasted morning, but it worked, and I was relieved to get some riding in for the day. And then the 2nd week of January, I was at the petrol station, and unbelievably, the same thing happened. It wouldn't start. I just filled up with petrol, parked at the petrol pump. The lights were on, the fuel pump worked, but there was nothing from the starter motor, stone cold dead. I phoned Dealer X because I was desperate. I wouldn't have done otherwise, but I was desperate. And they sent a van to pick me up after an hour or two. I got down to the dealership, and I asked for a loan bike, and was told there's nothing available. And that was that. They said you'll have to get the bus. I got the bus back, took about 2 hours. I got a phone call a couple of days later, and I was told it was a solenoid. So even though it was there for a couple of weeks, it just sat there doing nothing. While it was there, and when it eventually did get attention, the technician noted that the oil was very low. Dealer X contacted Triumph, and they were told by Triumph to drain what remained of the oil, which was 2.1 litres, and a complete oil change is 3.2 litres, so a third of the oil had been lost. I asked if there were any holes or cracks they could see, and there weren't. And from what I can gather, they stripped down the heads and they changed the valve clearances and the shims. I asked again if I could get a loan bike to get home because this was going to be a longer job. They said no bike available. And if you compare that with Harley, I've only got Harley Davidson experience, so that's what I've got to compare it to. But there, I dealt with riders in Bridgewater, the Harley Davidson dealership in Bridgewater, and I always got a loan bike. I never once got a bust. I always had a loan bike. So at the end of January, the work had been done, and I spoke to Dealer X, and it was pointed out to me in a roundabout fashion that it was my fault that the oil level was low, and I had to pay for a service, which was about £250 because the oil needed topping up. And I said I was not happy with this because I didn't believe it's my fault that the oil was low. And I said to Dealer X, look, I'm really unhappy about this. I'm going to complain direct to Triumph. And I wrote to Carl, his name is, at Triumph at Hinckley, the customer support chappie. And this was what was in my email. I'll just read it straight out. I'm very upset about my bike being so unreliable. After spending £12,500, I expected better from Triumph. Having to pay for a service is just adding insult to injury. If I had checked the oil immediately before setting off that day, I would have noticed the oil was low, phoned a dealer and got it booked in to find out why. Since the bike had engine cases replaced in September, it's my understanding that a properly functioning engine would never use 1.1 litres of oil in 4 months or about 3,000 miles. Something must be wrong, and it cannot be my doing, unless I physically drained the oil myself, and I would never do that, obviously. Also, I've never heard of a brand new bike or car needing shims after just 5,000 miles. Is something more serious going on here? Either way, if shims were needed, I should not be penalised for it. So that was my email to Triumph. While the bike was there, the technician also said the chains and sprockets need replacing. Bearing in mind these were brand new, 5,000 miles in 6 months, and they were rusted out. I did have a Scott oiler fitted, but I hadn't adjusted it properly, so it cost me about £350, including fitting. So now we're up to the first week of February. The bike's been in all this time, Dealer X, and I spoke to Carl at Triumph Customer Support. He said he appreciated the problems and understood that it was unacceptable, and he offered to buy a new bike, but I'd have to pay the difference. And I said I can't pay any more money, I can't contribute, as he put it, towards the difference between mine and another new one. So we agreed not to do that, and he said he would make sure Triumph covered the cost of the service, not the chain and sprockets. I was stuffed with that, but at least they would pay for the service. So on the 10th of February, Dealer X told me the bike was ready. I left home 9:30 in the morning. It took me 2 buses, about 2.5 hours. So I got there about midday. I got the paperwork done and I paid for the chain and sprocket and the fitting. So I went out immediately, did about 48 miles. On the way back, I was desperate for a pee, so I thought I'll call into Dealer X, use their loo, and by 2 p.m. had a quick squirt, got back out, and I was stunned to see that the bike was leaking oil again. I was almost overwhelmed with angst. I couldn't believe it. So I dragged the guy out from the shop and the tech guy, and they took the bike in. Apparently it was a clutch cover gasket, so they agreed to change that, as they flipping should as well. By 4:15 I'm still at the dealership. Anna's phoned me up what's going on, and well, I've just got to wait. 5 o'clock I got the bike back. I went straight home and arrived about 6. I was knackered. It had taken 8.5 hours, loads of hassle, and I was just collecting a bike that was apparently now fixed. So I've had the bike a month or so, been out for a couple of rides, just so relieved to be back on the road. On the 14th of March, I get back on the bike and it won't start. The starter motor does turn this time, but the engine doesn't fire. I've done about 400 miles since the last dealer work had been done. So I phoned Dealer X and I asked if they could send a van out because the bike won't start. I can't move it, even if it's next week. And I was told, no, they're too busy. Phone the RAC. I was again stunned, but I was stuck, so that's what I had to do. I phoned the RAC. The RAC guy came down, he took out the spark plug, and there was no spark. That's why the engine wasn't firing. But now there was an engine warning light on, and there was an error code of P211. Apparently that's a throttle position sensor problem. So I booked it in, but this time I booked it in with Exeter Bridge Motorcycles at Exeter because I didn't want to go to Dealer X side. So by the 21st of March the bike was booked in, and I thought I'll just start it because I don't want to be getting up tomorrow morning and trying to get the bike started and it won't go down there. So I got down to the garage, hit the start button, and nothing. There were lights, the fuel pump kicked in, but there was no starter motor, nothing. It just sat there. I was beside myself. I was so disappointed, depressed actually now at this point. So I phoned Bridge at Exeter and I said, look, the bike's booked in for next week, but I can't get it down there because it won't start. And they said they could collect it, but it would be £175, which given the distance isn't unreasonable, but for me it's still a new bike and I don't want to be shelling out for transport. So I complained again to Carl at Triumph and he sent the RAC in to collect the bike because I said I've got no confidence at all in Dealer X. So he agreed and I was hugely relieved and pleased. The bike was collected, taken down to Bridge in Exeter, and they replaced a gear position sensor and a neutral switch, which they said weren't working, and there was a plug inside the gearbox case that was not fitted correctly. All this was warranty work, so I'm very pleased with that. So the bike was in on the 28th of March, and on the 3rd of April I was able to go down and collect the bike, which took several buses and about 4 hours. And all in all, I had lost nearly another month of riding, and on the 4th of April, I had a puncture. So between June 2022 when the bike was delivered and June 2023, I'd done about 8,000 miles. This is a massive reduction on what I would have done, but there's nothing I could do about it. It had 3 months in the workshop having warranty work done. 3 months out of the first 9, by the way. When I complained to Triumph, I was fortunate at least that they agreed to extend the warranty by 2 years, which is worth £400. I said I've got no confidence in the bike, but if there's a warranty, well, that's a weight off my mind. It's a bit of a reassurance, to say the least. They also agreed to pay the Dealer X charges for the service, which again, I think they should have done. There's no reason I should have to pay for obviously I had to pay for the sprockets and the labour to put them on. I was stuffed with that. And they also got the bike taken down to Exeter when I couldn't move it. I was pleased. Triumph, they tried, and they did what they could. I was happy with that. But in those 3 months when the bike was off the road, honestly, I came so close to just cutting my losses and selling the Speedmaster twice. I was within inches of selling the bike, honestly, and I was selling it and I was going to get a 2018 or a 2020 Sportster. I was so close. But I still want those electronics. I do love the Speedmaster, and one reason I suppose is because the Hinckley support, it was good. In the year I've owned a brand new Triumph, the dealer support, sometimes it is utterly appalling. So I've had the bike a year, I've done about 8,000 miles. I have had a lot of experience of owning a brand new Triumph. What are the pros and cons? Well, we'll start with the cons because it gets the negatives out of the way. The first is the lack of customisation options. For Triumph generally, but Speedmaster specifically, Triumph offer almost no real customisations, and the aftermarket support is minimal at best. Of those customisation options, the greatest con for me is that there are no fairing options actually at all. And it means simple changes like changing the bars. It's fiddly. You've got to mess about. If you do happen to have a non-Triumph set of bars, you've gone to the aftermarket, you've got to get your drill out or a file. They won't fit properly. It's no good. Simple changes, they're fiddlier than they need to be, so that is definitely a con. Also, surprisingly perhaps, I find the engine a very revvy engine. Again, we're comparing this to an HD Sportster. That's legendarily low rev, and the torque on a Sportster comes in from zero. It's gorgeous. I miss that. I really do miss that. The Bonneville engine, it's a good engine, no question, but it does require revs. The engine, it revs much higher, and it needs revs to get to that torque, which is there, but you've got to work the engine a bit more to get it. Another con is that the fuel tank, just too small. There's no excuse for that. It's obviously cheaper to make a smaller tank. The bike has chain and sprockets. Again, I'm comparing it to a Harley, so I prefer a belt by a long way. Chain and sprockets, I hate that. Britannica notes that Hans Reynolds invented the Bush roller chain in Manchester, England in 1880. 1880. 19th century technology on a 21st century motorcycle. Absolutely disgraceful. I can understand it inside the engine, where it's surrounded by a case, totally protected, basically lives in oil. It's going to last forever. But outside, it's just so flimsy and fragile. It should be a belt, and if I had the money, I would get the belt conversion, but having a chain is a real con. Another con is that the mud guards are too short. Pointless. They don't guard against mud or anything else. They're just too small. Especially on a cruiser, unforgivable and just dreadful. Another con, strangely, is that it runs so very hot. Engine is incredibly hot. It is liquid cooled, but compared to my old Sportster, it's hotter. Unbelievably, a nice new 21st century Bonneville engine, it runs much hotter than a 50-year-old design of air-cooled Harley Davidson. Incredible. And if you've ever had to commute on a motorbike, you come out of work in the middle of the summer, the evening, the traffic's absolutely relentless and solid, the heat coming off the road and the buildings is incredible, and if you've got to ride through all of that, and then on top of it, the engine is chucking out heat inside your legs and up through your body, it is horrible. There's no excuse for having a liquid-cooled engine running so hot. I would also add that the finish on the engine cases in particular is just feeble. To have bare metal parts lacquered is a waste of space. It will tarnish after one journey in the wet. It is horrendous. I hate that bikes are like this. Engine cases, metal parts generally like brake discs, and on mine the clutch adjuster, they rust out so quickly and there's no need. The adjusters, like nuts and bolts, they should be steel. To have to put up with that on a brand new bike is unforgivable. You don't get it with cars. And why am I the only one who ever complains about it? It's not specifically a Speedmaster con, but it is one that should be shouted about more. Anti-corrosion warranty, that should be available on motorcycles as it is on cars. And the last con is, for me, all bikes need an oil pressure gauge and a voltage or ammeter, because the times I've been stuck because the battery hasn't charged and I haven't known, an oil pressure gauge would be useful. Not least because even when I had all the oil leaking and a third had gone, the oil light never came on. You say, oh, I'll just check the oil. It's actually really difficult on a Speedmaster because the brake lever is in front of the window and the window obviously very low down. Without getting the torch angle exactly right, you can't see. So on oil pressure gauge and a voltmeter or ammeter charging gauge, they're a must, I think, on, again, all bikes, not just Triumphs, but particularly on my Speedmaster I would like those. So there's a good selection of cons. But the pros. At the end of the day, whatever the cons are, I've still got the bike and I love it. So, why do I love it? First, perhaps the most profound, initially at least, was from the moment I saw it, I couldn't believe how utterly gorgeous the Triumph Speedmaster was. It was so much better, such a higher level of design than the old version, the 2002 version and on, especially in pearl white and black. Oh, I think they are just the most beautiful bike. I would have bought one too, but in 2018 it was a brand new bike. I couldn't afford it. That's the first pro. It just looks wonderful. And it's very important to me that the brand and the bike has a heritage behind it, a real heritage. Obviously Triumph, probably the oldest continuously produced bike in the world nowadays. The brand has real heritage, but the model also has heritage. It's a Bonneville breed, and that's just legendary. So that was important to me. Another pro, although it sounds like a con, again, I'm comparing this to a Sportster. Actually, the Speedmaster is heavier than a Sportster, but it doesn't feel like it. Riding it, the Sportster, it felt much heavier than the Speedmaster, even though that's not the case. The Speedmaster feels lighter, and it's lovely. That's a tremendous pro as far as I'm concerned. That's very clever Triumph design, I suppose. Another very important pro, perhaps the killer app as far as I'm concerned, are the electronics. I need traction control, I want cruise control, they're a must. The ABS seems much better than a Sportster, perhaps not a world of surprise there, but nevertheless it is. Again, it sounds like a con in as much as it should be an IMU, inertial measurement unit. There should be like lean sensitive ABS and whatnot. But that isn't available unless you spend much more money. So the electronics that are there are excellent, and things like cruise control I've never had before in any vehicle. Wonderful. Wouldn't want to be without it now. A surprising pro actually was the high MPG, the fuel economy. Surprisingly good. That does alleviate the small tank a little bit. You can get 60 miles a gallon or something. To me, on a 1200cc bike, that's excellent fuel economy, and it does need to be agreed, but nevertheless that's a pro. Another pro is that it's got the Bonneville engine. Although it runs a little bit revvily for me, it revs too freely, and it lacks that Sportster grunt that I really miss, especially at low engine speeds. Nevertheless, it is a good cruiser engine. I would like longer gears. The engine, it's got the oomph to take it. If I had the money, I'd have the belt conversion, which apparently has a smaller pulley on the rear, so that will work. Nevertheless, the engine itself is good, and it does make for a good cruiser, the Bonneville engine. So that's a pro. The general handling is superb. Not just for a cruiser, the Speedmaster handling is remarkable. And nearly all of that, I think, is down to the fork rate, which is so reduced. Might also be the monoshock suspension, but nevertheless, the bike is beautifully designed and balanced, as you would expect on a modern bike. Also the lights, all-round LED, they're excellent. I mean, what can you say? The Speedmaster is absolutely fantastic, an excellent 21st century cruiser. That's my evaluation after a year and a whole load of trouble, but also some of the most wonderful, the happiest moments of the year.